Welcome to Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer-engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim, Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Jewish Museum of the American West, and Atheists United Studios. Hey, Joey, imagine this. It's 1911. Albert Einstein and Franz Kafka are both in Prague. Einstein has proposed his theory of relativity, but it isn't fully formed. Kafka is an insurance executive, and his great stories are just ideas in his diary. Mix in a little Alice in Wonderland, and you've got a splendid graphic novel by today's guest.
We're happy to chat with Ken Krimstein, a cartoonist and graphic novelist whose latest book is Einstein and Kafkaland. He previously authored The Three Escapes of Hannah Arendt, When I Grow Up, The Lost Autobiography of Six Yiddish Teenagers, and Kvetch Can, a collection of Jewish cartoons. Ken, welcome to Amusing Jews.
Thanks very much. Nice to be here, sort of, from Berlin.
Your cartooning is loose and impressionistic, but also detailed and meticulous. How did you arrive at this unique and very recognizable style?
I don't know. But you work by contingency. You work by, you have a deadline. You have to do something. And for my training, so to speak, in doing gag cartoons or single panel cartoons for the New Yorker, I had to learn how to communicate very quickly and very clearly, and with one color, black or black and white. And I leaned in that into line work, and I have always liked, the kind of line that I get with just black on white. I mean, it's just something that I really like. As I started moving more into comics or graphic novels or bande dessinée, as I like to call them, like the French do, because I'm pretentious. No, because they get a certain amount of respect there. I started to realize that the texture of the entire page delivers a lot of meaning. And my father was an artist and a watercolor painter. And I started to experiment with using the ink line that I like, but then watercolor washes over it. And I found this to be a really great way, especially in the Einstein and Kafkaland book, which takes place in sort of the period of German expressionism. When I would throw the blue color down, you can see on the page the physical flow of the water. So I really like doing that. The one color thing, yeah, that was, luckily I'd been trained again from doing cartoons that are just gray, shades of gray. So when I moved into tone, like I would pick one color. The Hannah Arendt book uses the color green. The When I Grow Up book uses orange, and this one uses a combination of blues and blacks, and I could work with those shadows. So, it's a constant process. I like to think that I'm growing as an artist, and I am always experimenting with new forms. In fact, recently I've been working with napkins that I've been filching from various diners, and using a big fat Japanese black brush to see how that looks. But the problem is that I may get arrested for stealing napkins, and that could be the end of my career.
The New Yorker sort of has a famous style as well, like almost a house style, even though the individual artists have their own personalities, of course. Did you find yourself adjusting to that when you started working for the New Yorker as well?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I've always admired the New Yorker's work forever. And actually the style has sort of changed over the years. There were some people like Bob Weber, who used a chalk pencil. Charles Adams, who I've always admired a lot, did paint his drawings. Kind of when I started really getting interested in it when I was a child, and then the kind of clear line that maybe a Jack Ziegler would use, or Arnie Levin, those types of people. And I love Sam Gross, who's always a mentor and a friend of mine. And so I felt like, I guess that was how my head worked for those cartoons. At one point, people get very superstitious. At one point, one cartoonist who shall remain nameless said to me, I tried using a brush, and somebody told me they won't accept any cartoons that are done with painted with a brush. I don't know if that's true or not, but people get, you know, a little hinky about these things. Um, and, it's funny, a true story. The first time I sold a cartoon to the New Yorker, I was, super excited. And the cartoon editor at the time, Bob Mankoff, I don't know if he was hazing me or if it was real, but he sort of said, "Can you try redrawing it?" And of course, I was like, "Oh," I went out and I bought like the most expensive, rapidograph pen, and I did all this stuff, and it was so tight, it was awful. And he said, "Well, we'll just stay with the original one that you did." So, it's a learning process, as I say. And, when Roz Chast broke in, her style was so naive and so different. She tells quite a funny story where some of the older cartoonists, looked at hers and asked the cartoon editor at the time, Lee Lorenz, they said, do you owe her family money or something? Because they couldn't figure out. And of course, Roz has now become one of the greatest, most influential. So the styles can change, but uh, I find that I have a pretty different style for the comics and gags than I do in the books.
Enjoying the show? Click like and subscribe.
You have a journalism background, and a lot of research went into Einstein in Kafkaland. When did you start combining journalism, cartoons, and storytelling?
I think that started at Allen B. Shepard Junior High School in Deerfield, Illinois, when I started doing, the minute that we had a school newspaper, I was like, yeah, all right, I can start drawing cartoons. And I found that this combination of reality and fantasy was like catnip for me. I really like that because you can tell truths, but you do it in an amusing way. So people kind of don't know that they're getting the truth. They kind of just like looking at the pictures. And I from a very early time, I realized that. But I think also a big influence on me, and I've spoken about this, is my great uncle. Somehow one day I looked, a box appeared in the house, not you, and it had all these classic illustrated comics from his childhood, and they were beat up, they were falling apart. But I started opening them and looking at them, and they had true stories in them. I mean, they were like, you know, how the atomic bomb was made, for instance, or, you know, the FBI, what are fingerprints? And but I just loved them. I read them over and over and over again. I always liked history and biography. And, as I got older, I realized that they really were doing something quite extraordinary there. They would hire a lot of the freelance artists who worked on, EC's horror books or some of the other stuff, but they would have them do these stories. And these stories were edited by this woman named Roberta Strauss Freulich, who went on to become quite a controversial writer, wrote one of the first sort of books about Israel that kind of acknowledged that there were Palestinians, and was kind of canceled back in the 70s or 80s. I don't know. But in any case, at the time that she was editing these books, she was always working in kind of subversive stuff for the time. And of course, I finally found out that she was quite an interesting character in her own right. And this through line helped. And as I learned more, I mean, when also, I loved Mad Magazine. I thought Mad Magazine was completely nonfiction. I mean, and it was, because I hate to date myself, but when I grew up in Deerfield, like, there were not movies with subtitles. I didn't even know what that was. Like, what's a Japanese movie? And of course, all these New York Jews were making fun of like the Seven Samurai and all this stuff. So I learned about the world, through those. And then I found out that another amusing Jew, a famously amusing Jew, Harvey Kurtzman, uh, not only did incredible humor with EC, but incredible nonfiction, or what I would call documentary style stories through all the war books that he did. So I don't know, that world was just there waiting for me. And I prefer it to journalism. I wasn't a very good journalist. I was actually a terrible journalist uh, because I just always wanted to make things more interesting than they were.
As a kid, did you sort of see a Jewish sensibility in the works that you're describing, or did you sort of come to that realization later?
No, in those days, I had no idea that Stan Lee. I mean, I didn't even care who drew them, to tell you the truth. I just like ate them up. Um, no, no, I had no sense. It was interesting when I got older, and I like to do research, as you said. I'm very interested in how things work and where they come from. That a lot of people were doing books about like, the Jewish super comic heroes, and Superman was based on the Golem and all this stuff. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it was, uh, I mean, I kind of knew that Woody Allen, the late Woody Allen or whatever he is, Neff, uh, not late, thank God, but I kind of knew he was riffing on some Jewish tropes, but no, no, I didn't realize the depth of that in comics.
Mad Magazine has been called a secular Talmud for its commentaries and its sort of layered kind of observational um, critique.
And the thing is, not everybody who worked in the magazine was. I mean, I think, Mort Drucker was. I don't think Jack Davis was. I mean, Al Jaffe was. But Martin, Don Martin, wasn't. But the publishers and the people behind it, and as I got older and I started realizing, oh, and there were Jews in the film business. Oh, and they're not just my dentist. I just would read and reread those comics. And there were a lot of people who loved the Men in Tights stuff, and of course my great friend and I, who I ended up having a band with and everything, we hated what each other liked. So he loved Marvel, so I had to love DC. He loved Eric Clapton, so I like had to love like Jeff Beck or Jimi Hendrix. You know, and we agreed on the Beatles, I think, but I'm not quite sure. So you know, uh, I would say I kind of liked DC comics, but the New Yorker, uh, when I saw the magic that happened on one frame and the subversiveness, and then when I started going into the local pharmacy to peruse National Lampoon's photo funnies and also their cartoons, and I started discovering people like Sam Gross and his humor, I just, you know, and a transformative moment for me also was when I was quite innocently in those days going to Boy Scout camp of all things. My father was a Boy Scout, and somebody smuggled onto the bus 2 issues of Zap comics featuring completely cancelable stuff by R. Crumb, and I thought, Boy Scouts isn't that bad, kept the I kept the Zap comics, and I thought, You could do this?"
What attracted you to Einstein's 16 Months in Prague?
Well, what attracted me to that was that Einstein tried to bury it in a way. It was a lost part of his own autobiography in many ways, and I can understand maybe why, because he was failing. He was failing when he got there. His theories were incomplete. His marriage was on the rocks. He had to wear a military uniform to get inducted. He had to um, suffer through bed bugs and, you know, the heat and Prague and, whatever. And I'm attracted to that because part of my practice of what I'm doing is what I call vulgarizing history. I vulgarize not in the bad sense of like, oh, that's so vulgar. But when I was in France, somebody came up to me and said, oh, you are vulgarizing history. And I was like, oh, I was going to punch the guy. But in French, actually, vulgariser, a verb, means to make the complicated simple. And I thought, wow, that's kind of cool. So, like most people, I was always an Einstein person from afar. I could not understand any of it. Watched every Nova, everything, never could figure it out. Then when I found out that Kafka was also there and also kind of failing, I mean, struggling, finding his voice, I thought, okay, let me just check this out. And again, I'm not doing this in like a deep, you're going to get a PhD, but I'm trying to grasp the story behind it. And what happens is, so Einstein arrives in Prague on April 1st, no fooling, 1911, and leaves July 25th of 1912. Over that period, he figures out how to, as he put it, solve gravity. And Kafka is basically on the path to his first real, true literary masterpiece story. I thought, whoa, something happened. And that, to me, that's just, let's go. And that's, I wanted to figure out, what they were doing and what happened over that period. The nice thing about Kafka's uh, during that period was, he kept an incredible diary. And I started reading the diary in the translation that his friend Max Brod had done. And then in the midst of it, a friend of mine just so happened to have published another translation, Ross Benjamin. And I tell you, for your viewers here, the Kafka diaries are just, I don't care if it's Max Brod or you read it in German or Ross Benjamin, it's some of the most profound and interesting in writing. And Einstein, over the same period, the internet of the day, the email of the day was letters. And his letters were funny and understandable. So this was a really great window into this lost year.
Einstein and Kafkaland includes some imagined encounters between Einstein and Kafka. Is there any evidence that they actually spent time together?
There are three levels of that. One, there are stories from people who were at this, there was a salon, so this was a period in Jewish history that was really quite special and lost. The German speaking minority in Prague was predominantly Jewish. I mean, I think there were 10% of the city and 50% of the German speakers there were Jewish. They were very assimilated. And they congregated at a salon by this woman with the incredible name of Berta Fanta. And she was the first woman ever to graduate, you know, and they had these incredible people. So the people have written about that. And the minute that Einstein got to town, they wanted to get their claws into him, this community, not for the physics so much, but mostly for the violin playing, because they used to like get together on Tuesday nights. And as I put it in my parlance, they would jam, and Einstein loved to play the violin. So they needed a violin player. So that was cool. So a lot people talk about that. The second level of it is there is a biography. It's about 1,300 pages long, 4 volumes. I used the bibliography and the notes to find the parts on Einstein, and it's written by a German guy named Rainer Stock, and it's really really good. But it puts them together. Definitely. And if it's good enough for, so when Einstein comes to Prague, the first thing he does besides playing the fiddle is, he has to do a lecture. I mean, the theory of relativity is still going around and, so everyone, all the kind of Jewish, intellectual hangers-on of the salon go to this talk. And Stock makes a point of saying Kafka and all his pals went. And so I have them at least definitely together on that night, May 24th, 1911. And the third one is just sort of the feel of the place and, kind of things that were contiguous, Thomas Edison visiting, uh, the high holidays, different conjectures that they were crossing paths. And there were people who intersected with both of them. And there was actually, I don't know, if you're like, we owe it to Max Brod that we're even having this talk, because this was Kafka's best pal, and he was also a friend of Einstein. So there's some good evidence. But Brod, who was a historical novelist, wrote an entire story, which I met a professor who claims was basically a romantic clef about Einstein and Kafka and how they hung out. So, and there was again, through the research, it's so kind of fun to do this now. There was a physicist, a Czech physicist, Zdeněk Kopel, who actually helped put the men on the moon in America, but he was working and studied with Einstein when he was young. And he goes on the record as saying, this was Einstein's most creative period, was when he was in Prague. And on a deeper level, I guess on a storytelling level, I was trying to connect what might have been in the air that was influencing the two of them. And that's why I went to Prague and lived there for a year and discovered so many interesting things that are visual. And, there's a truth that comes out of visual humor, or visual verbal humor, which supersedes maybe, the kind of accountant's truth. Although if it's Bernie Madoff, that may be a different type. Sorry, Bernie. But, you know, it's a kind of truth that you put all the pieces together. Prague has this incredible mystical Jewish history, Golem, this, that. It has this cemetery that is like something out of Frankenstein, everything's crooked and this and that. It has this emperor, this mad King Rudolph, who had hired all these astronomers, Johannes Kepler, who wrote the first science fiction novel while he was figuring out the planets. And, uh, the salon of Bertha Fanta, where Martin Buber came to speak, and Rudolf Steiner. I mean, like crazy stuff, This was the world. It was the center, God help me, of Cubist architecture. Who ever heard of such a thing? Yet when you go to Prague, they show you buildings that look like Picasso paintings. Crazy. So this all filtered into the story. So there's 3 levels of it, and that's good enough for me,
As much as your book centers around a moment in time, it's also about gravity. Your depictions of how gravity works are better than most textbooks. Did making the book improve your own science literacy?
Well, first of all, thank you for saying it's better than most textbooks. I mean, that's kind of a huge compliment. But I use the power of the graphic medium to demonstrate complicated thoughts. I did it with Hannah Arendt, but I do it in unexpected ways. And that's my fun and my challenge. Did it improve my scientific literacy? You're damn right it did. I mean, but the problem is, even though I'm not particularly, as Sam Gross, Oliver Sholem said to me, Ken, you're a cartoonist. Cartoonists know everything. And I kind of knew everything. I had to pay somebody to help tutor me in physics, and that was really, really hard. But I did come to the understanding that we're not supposed to understand it. Like, you can't understand it. Like 4D, we're not wired for that. And once you understand that, then you can understand it. It's like very circular. But I did want to try, and I've been annoying to like anybody I know who has studied physics, because over the past whatever years, I say to them, what's this business with like light always going the same speed, no matter if you're going toward it or going away from it? Like, what's the deal with that? And then they would go on and explain for like, a half hour, and I'd be like, I still didn't understand it. So then like many of the viewers, I would look at books and stuff, and there was always this example where, you see a train car and somebody shines a flashlight and there's somebody standing on the edge of the train track. And all I could think about was like how gross it is to stand next to a train track. It's always smelly and there's garbage. And I couldn't figure out what a light was doing and a flashlight. And I couldn't ever make any sense of it. So I had to try and figure out how to tell that in a fresh way. And it was hard, but I, Einstein was a visual thinker. He always said that. He said, I think in pictures. And I embraced that. And he had these thought experiments, and they were kind of, you could draw them. You could draw them. So for instance, um, I was trying to connect these phenomena to my own life. So I don't know if any of the viewers have ever had this experience, but when I was a kid and I'm in the back of the car and my parents are driving home from some horrible event that we all had to go to, and I'm bored and I'm tossing a coin, right? I'm sitting in the back of the car, but I'm tossing a coin. If there's not traffic, the car is going 50 miles an hour. Toss the coin up. Now, the coin, I'm not holding the coin. I'm just tossing it in the air. What if there was no wind? I tossed it out the window. I'm not holding it. Shouldn't it fly back while the car's going forward? So I extrapolated that to Einstein having a conversation with his kid on the train, because one of the things why I wanted to go to Prague, and I was lucky to go during a lull in the pandemic, I wanted to take the same train that Einstein took from Zurich to Prague. So I'm sitting on the train and I'm tossing a coin, and guess what? It doesn't fly back. And by dramatizing that, I was able to do this concept in physics, which they call inertial space. Now, if you say inertial space to 99.9% of all people, they fall asleep. Like, oh. So, but if you say, if you could imagine there was no atmosphere and I threw this ball really, really high, it would follow us. So that was when and to try and do these stories, and thank you so much, Joey, for saying that, to try and do these stories in a way that people could comprehend was forced me to learn it. But at the same time, then I would talk to my wife about it and I'd say, do you realize that when you say you dropped an elephant and a peanut and they would fall at the same rate. She'd go like, shut up, that's too weird. But then I'd have to try and figure out how to draw it. And spoiler alert, I think I did in the book, a little bit, based on what Einstein said. Because he had this vision of whether it's true or not, I'm not quite sure, but it gives you a little sense of what a kind of character he was. He was he was bored looking out the window at the Swiss patent office, and a guy's like painting the clock tower. And the guy either falls or he imagines the guy falling. And while the guy is falling, Einstein realizes the dude is cool. He's weightless. He's not falling. The earth is rushing up. He's fine. And out of that thought, Einstein has this incredible breakthrough that our natural state of being is falling, which is like wacky as hell. But so I tried to show that. So if I could get little, as he says to one of his friends, I think I found a piece of the truth. If I can just get little pieces of the truth and dramatize them, I'm happy.
You have a scene where Einstein's friend Paul Ehrenfest, a fellow Jewish physicist, challenges Einstein for renouncing his atheism as a requirement for his professorship in Prague. To this day, people like to claim that Einstein was a theist, mainly because he later used the metaphor that God doesn't play dice with the universe. Kafka's Judaism is also very complicated. What can you tell us about this?
On one sense, yeah, the story with Paul Ehrenfest is exactly in the letters. I mean, Einstein wanted Ehrenfest, by the way, just an incredible character, deserving of his own. It'd be a very sad graphic novel, but an incredible character, Paul Ehrenfest. But in any case, Einstein did want Ehrenfest to take his place, and Ehrenfest needed a gig. I have this vision of all these physicists, mostly Jewish, roaming around Europe in this period trying to get jobs, Göttingen, Utrecht, Cambridge. Einstein was even courted by Columbia University before he took the gig in Prague. But Einstein had to be appointed to this position. You couldn't be an atheist. The emperor would not tolerate that. He would tolerate a lot of other stuff. So Einstein finally says, "Oh, I am a member of the Mosaic faith," and they say, "Okay, strap on this uniform and you can get the job." So Einstein tries to get Ehrenfest to take the job. He writes several letters, and Ehrenfest says, "I'm not going to do it, man. You and I both believed that physics invalidates all this stuff. And you wore this uniform and you said this thing, And Einstein, literally in one of his letters, he says, "Come on, it's just like meaningless words to an old doddering fool." And Ehrenfest says, "No, I'm not. I don't play that. I'm not going to do that." But on another level, there were a lot of, when you talk about the Jewish substrata of this, Einstein, when he was about 11, rebelled against his parents who were super assimilated, and he became basically completely Orthodox. I mean, he was eating kosher. And this was, of course, annoying his parents to no end because they were completely assimilated. And his parents were actually getting kind of worried that Einstein was becoming such a religious zealot. So they got this math tutor who was actually a medical student, with the incredible name of Max Talmud, to come teach Einstein math. And Einstein writes about this, and so does Talmud. The minute the Talmud starts saying, and by the way, when he moved to New York, he changed his name to Max Talmy. Still wrote books about Einstein. But the minute that Talmud shows him Euclidean equations, Einstein's like, "You mean that happens all the time? Like his Red Sea parting stuff?" He goes, "Yeah, that happens all the time." Einstein then teaches himself calculus and chucks his Jewish religion and every other religion. And Kafka was in a similar situation where his parents had renounced. They were Eastern European Yiddish-speaking Jews, his father, and totally renounced it. So Kafka becomes obsessed with Yiddish and starts shoving it in his father's face, and his father does not like this. So that was an act of rebellion. But on a deeper level, I think Einstein did believe that there is kind of a truth in the universe. And this is why he said, he also said he believes in Spinoza's God. He doesn't believe that God even notices, if you're "Oh God, don't let my parents find out I broke, the coffee cup, and glued it together." No, that's not what he believes. But he does think that there are laws. And it's, he has his limitations. He's very secular. He would not become president of Israel, so on and so forth. But he also believed and struggle to his dying day that there should be that the universe should make sense. And Kafka too, I think, from my reading, he had this perplexing notion that there are laws. It's just that they're utterly incomprehensible to us. If you look at in one of his books, he has this thing called the parable of the law, and it's completely like this dude is like trying to get into this door, and he can't. He waits his whole life, and the guy says, "Oh, you could have just walked through it, or something to that effect." And Kafka says he has an amazing quote where he says, "There's hope for God, but not for us," which is kind of mind bending. So, to a certain extent, there were a lot of similarities. Both their fathers were named Herman, by the way, which I thought was kind of interesting. Um, but they also had an audacity, and I tried to make. That's what I was interested in their characters. Einstein just had the hubris, the self-confidence, the stupidity to think that he could fix the problems in Newton, and he did. And Kafka felt that, as Seinfeld, that other, or maybe it was Larry David many years later, no morals, no learning. Kafka was like, no laughing, no hugging, no learning, just a slap of a cold fish in your face. Deal with it. And that is rule breaking of the first order, which I think is kind of maybe amusing and maybe sort of Jewish. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I remember hearing that when Kafka was reading Metamorphosis to his friends in its early drafts, they just thought it was the funniest thing ever and laughed their heads off. And I think that was part of the point of it, and we've lost sight of that over the years, taking Kafka maybe a little too, not seriously, we should take it seriously, but thinking that it's serious and not also humorous.
Yeah, I'm glad yeah, he laughed all the time. Only read twice publicly in his life, both during this period. One, it's a speech where he basically tells the entire assembled Jewish community, German-speaking Jewish community of Prague, you're all scared of Yiddish and you all speak it. You're a bunch of cowards. And the second time he reads the Judgment's first story. And yes, he would laugh. And if you kind of go back, and one of the things about Kafka, maybe Einstein, I don't know, certainly, great art tends to reflect its time. It morphs, and it has some bizarre way of doing that. So in the 30s and 40s and 50s, the days of the organization man, the 60s, Kafka was this sort of, as I say, this avatar of like, people going, robotically in their offices and stuff. Now I look at it and it's almost proto-Marx, not Karl, Groucho, because they're absurd premises. They're building a wall. They're not totally humorous, but they're like gags. And he has, they're building a wall of China, and it's so long, it's almost like a Tower of Babel meets there's rodents that live under the ground, and they want to pop their heads up. They're premises. There's an ape, that is going to lecture scientists. It's kind of he works off of premises, and yes, you would laugh, and his writings were funny. Einstein too. There's a phrase in the book where he writes to one of his friends because he goes to Prague, and at first he really, really likes it. Then he finds out, he's head of the department, and he has to like order all the cleaning supplies and stuff, and he doesn't like that. And he writes to his friend, "I fear I've become a professional ink shitter," and that's the way he spoke. It was kind of guttural. In fact, when I mentioned that in a recent talk, a cartoonist friend of mine, his wife turned to him and said, "That's what I'm going to call you from now on, a professional ink shitter." So I think Einstein was onto something.
As previously mentioned, Einstein and his family left Prague on July 25th, 1912. What impact did Einstein have on the city, and how did the city impact him?
He didn't have a lot of impact on the city. He probably left one apartment vacant that had electricity and an elevator. But on the other hand, they're very proud. You can walk around Prague and see many plaques. Einstein's salon was here, so on and so forth. In fact, as part of my research, I said I have to visit his office. People who read the book will see why. That's an important anecdote, and it's told in almost every Einstein biography that deigns to mention Prague. And it's kind of told differently every time. So I had to go there. And I went into it, which is in an old university building. There's a huge plaque of Einstein in there. It also so happened that Ernst Mach, who was like an incredible, also like built the building. He doesn't get anything. Einstein, big thing. And a lot of the physicists from Prague were very influenced. A lot of the people in Bertafanta's salon, people went on to found Hebrew University and stuff like that. So I think, there was a strong, I guess, physics theme there, his subsequent people, but he was also extremely ambitious. I learned about him. I mean, the minute he got to Prague, he was trying to figure out how to get out of there. He was always looking for the next gig. And so, I don't know if he had a lot of love lost. That's what was curious about it. But I think it had a big influence on him, and other people have looked at it. So, this is my $64 word, liminal space, which means kind of an in-between space. Seaports are like that and stuff. And Prague was very much a liminal space, still is kind of. I mean, it's in a very peculiar location. The Czech people, and particularly the Jewish Czech people, have to be very affable to everybody. And I think that Einstein's time there gave him distance from. He liked that, from the pressure of, say, he was in Cambridge or at Columbia University or something like that, and he could, and people have said, and this was one of the things that inspired me, kind of goof around, try stuff that he wasn't maybe supposed to be doing, and also, and this is where Einstein and Kafka intersect too. There was a philosopher there, aside from Ernst Mach, named Brentano, and this guy was all about like, prove it to me, and when Einstein came there, he had to come up with a proof, and he did. And Kafka was very interested in what's real, what's prove it to me. So I think that liminal space and that culture of show me really, and also the fact that Kepler, and Tycho Brahe were there, who were great astronomers. I think it influenced Einstein a lot more than he might have let on. His correspondence was incredible. There's some very funny instances of where he's trying to prove his theory, and to do this, he has to show that light will actually bend when it passes a star. Not the easiest thing in the world to prove, but he figured out how to do it.
Well, thank you so much, Ken, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I hope it was amusing.
And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.